All right, friends, welcome back to another week of After the Pause. I'm so excited. Today we have Amy Debrucque with us, which is so exciting. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, Kate, and I'm excited to connect with Christy today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so excited to have you with us. This whole idea of after the pause, it really came from the book Christy and I wrote together, which was A Place Called Bravery, which is just all about courage, about how do we live courageously, dream boldly, influence bravery in others. And truly, like when I think of people that fit that idea so well, like you are one that comes to mind, Amy. I got to connect with you on your podcast, Life on Purpose podcast, and just that conversation was so rich. And I left it thinking like, wow, I wish that you didn't live in New York and I live in Chicago. Cause like I'd love to connect with you more. So just to give you all an idea of who Amy is a wife, a mom of four, a life coach, co-author of Embolden, and host of Life on Purpose podcast, where she encourages women to live on purpose instead of fear. Amy loves entertaining with family and friends. Yes, a self-proclaimed beach junkie, health nut, and chocolate lover. She loves cooking, baking, attending her kids' sporting events, and getting in weekly HIIT workouts with her friend Alice. I love that. I love that that gives you just such a good idea of who you are. You're clearly up to a lot. But would you just go ahead and share a little bit more about who you are, where you are, what you're up to? I'd just love for our friends to just get an idea of who you are.
Sure. So I'm actually located in central New York, which is about 20 miles east of Syracuse. When you say New York, immediately people think you're in the city, but we're not all in the city. So this is a nice rural area. But I have four kids, like Kate said. Three now are out of the house, so it's a different dynamic. So the game schedule has really scaled down, which in some ways is nice because we can just focus on my youngest, who's a junior in high school. But for her, she gets the short end of the stick because she's just stuck with my husband and I. But it's all good. Three of them are on the West Coast. My oldest son is on a deployment in the Navy. And so his siblings decided to pick up grad school and undergrad. And the three of them were going to live out there together until this deployment started. So this is their second year. And then they'll all, I think, be heading back, and my son when he gets out. So it's a different time for sure, but it's an exciting time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, we're super excited to hear more from you today. I'm excited that I get to meet you for the first time. This is fun. Kate's told me little bits about you here and there. So thank you again for joining us. On this podcast, we tend to talk a lot about just what it means to be a woman of courage. And we can't really talk about courage without also talking about fear. And so I'm just curious for you, what are some questions? What are some common fears and responses to them that you find that women face today?
I think the biggest fear really is self-doubt. We have so many things where we begin that overthinking process because we just don't have the confidence. And really, to me, it was, I'm sorry, if you heard that shaking, anybody listening, that was my dog, but they like it when I'm on an interview. That's when they decide to wake up.
It's true.
But as far as fears with women, I really think that the overthinking piece, and this is my experience, was not necessarily putting all of our trust where it should be, which is in God. And I think as women, because we manage a lot, we spin a lot of plates, wear a lot of hats, we find ourselves in a role where we are naturally in control of a lot of things. And so when we feel threatened by anything that we might not be able to control the outcome with, that fear really begins to overrun us. And we start self-doubting and overthinking things that we really need to just hand over to God. But in those moments, I think it's really difficult to do. And so it's a common theme among women for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can recognize that in my own life and in different seasons. And, as you were sharing, you talk about placing your trust in God. And I say that all the time too. I'm curious for you, what what does it look like? And what does it mean to place our trust in God, to give something up to him and to just say, okay, I trust you in that? Like, what does that look like to you?
Well, in a practical sense, it's a daily surrender. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's never been a one and done. When I when I had this pivot, 11 years ago, to be able to do that, it wasn't just something I was saying, it was something that I actually had to put into action. And so I wish, that overcoming fear and all of that, there was just a simple solution. But for me, it has to be a daily practice and a daily discipline. And so that is just every morning, giving it up to him of things that are out of my control, and being okay with whatever that is going to be. That doesn't mean that things aren't scary. It doesn't mean that I still don't find myself feeling uncertain at times. But at the end of the day, I know that whatever is in his will is the right thing at this time. And I just have to trust the process.
Yeah, that's so good. I definitely like what you said about like a daily practice. That's something that Christy and I talk about a lot is, okay, I have to choose today to live with courage, to dream bravely, whatever it is. I think there's so much in our lives that is a daily choice, a daily practice. And especially when it comes to our faith, it's just a daily choosing him over and over. Sometimes moment by moment, I'm like, okay, I choose you again, Jesus. I choose you again. Like walking into a situation that feels unknown or uncertain, it's kind of a second by second thing, even for me. So I think that that's really good. I'm curious as well for you, like, what are some questions that we can ask ourselves to get to that root of the fear that we're feeling? Like throughout the day, there's so many things that we could be afraid of, so many insecurities that we could have. But when we're trying to address them, it's good to go to the root. So what are some questions that we can ask to get to that root?
Well, that's a great question, because I think a lot of times we have a tendency to just put a Band-Aid on it because we're always in motion and we don't take the time to figure out what the root is and what the root cause is. And so one of the things when I coach women is the first thing I ask them when we're talking about this, because we start at the root, which is interesting that you're bringing it up. And that is what is a constant trigger? Like what is the common trigger that seems to be showing up, surfacing every time you're having this fear or insecurity or whatever? Because typically when we peel back the layers, there's always a common denominator, whatever that is. And that's really where you need to begin to address things. And sometimes addressing that, and depending on what it is, could be totally out of my capabilities to coach somebody. And that's where I have to say, okay, this is something a little bit deeper. And, maybe a therapist needs to be involved or whatever. Most times it's not. Most times it's just something that we've put on the back burner. We've slapped a Band-Aid on it and we just haven't really wanted to bring it to the surface. It doesn't always have to be something devastating or that would require a next step in therapy. But regardless, it does need to be addressed, and we don't like to do that. You know what I mean? We like to just keep going. And a lot of times that's simply because we just have so much going on that we rarely take that pause for ourselves. That's why I love the name of the podcast, is we rarely take the pause for ourselves to figure that important stuff out. And really, that's the only way to get to the root of your fear, is to really figure out what that common theme is that keeps triggering it.
That's good.
That's really good. Okay, so to partner with that question, I mean, you talked about the kinds of questions to ask. What about for you? What are some courageous practices that you put into place to help you choose courage over fear every single day?
Well, like I said, to me, it sounds simple, but it's not. Anybody who struggles with anxiety or fear, having a daily discipline to surrender is actually not that easy, but it's what I do. And so I think it's a matter of also, in addition to that, is finding some good practices that become your new habit. When you are an anxious person and you are naturally more inclined to worry, find a practice to replace that. So in other words, instead of getting up and already starting to focus in on what the concern is, maybe you exchange that practice for something else. And so every morning now you're just replacing out a worry for a trust and what that looks like. It could be calling a friend, you're a mentor, someone speaking truth into you, someone just to encourage you. It could be reading something. It's going to look unique for each individual. And I think that's also important to remember. Do what works for you. Don't do what necessarily you think is the right thing because your friend is doing it. Some people are more, more affected by a conversation and other people are more affected by sitting in the Word by themselves and just doing it independently. Do what works for you, because ultimately it's going to be setting yourself up for success. And so I think that's another important thing. I think as Christian women too, we kind of go in the direction where we feel like this is what we should be doing. But I think if you have God at the focus, I think no matter what you're doing is going to be the right thing for you to do as long as it gets you out of it. And another thing that I also really tried to do, and I've done this now for almost 20 years, is I also, when we're talking about triggers, I try to remove myself out of situations and spaces of where the triggers happen. And so even if something as simple, and this may sound silly to the two of you, but even like shows that I watch, music that I listen to, sometimes those things can bring you to places that you really don't need to go. And so it's important, again, to really recognize what things you really should be maybe pouring more into and what things you should be kind of taking yourself out of. And sometimes it's something as simple as a show on TV, or like I said, music that you're listening to, or conversations that you really shouldn't be in. So it's just pay attention to those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a really good point. Like my dad, I love him dearly. He's had this rule for the last year or so, and it's personal rule where he says that he won't watch anything that doesn't feed his soul. And as you can imagine, the list is very small. Things that actually feed your soul. And sometimes they're really cheesy movies. Sorry, Dad. But I've seen a huge difference in him. And so I think that is, and he would even say the same, like he's seen a huge difference. So I love bringing out that piece, because what we take in, that comes out too. It's not just digested and that's it, but it comes out too. I'm so intrigued by this idea of triggers. But I'm also intrigued by just the idea that, like we're so busy that it can be really hard to get down to the source of the root of that fear, because we're just so busy and it tends to like get pushed to the side. So I have a couple of different questions, but one of them for you is, what would you say to the woman who's like, yeah, but really I'm so busy, I don't know how to pause to like actually get down to the root of this? Because maybe she knows that like, if I could just get down to the root of it, I could find freedom and healing from it, but she feels overwhelmed and busy. What would you say to her?
I'd say she's probably like most women that I know, and including myself. I think when you start this journey, you really have to also wrap your mind around the idea of self-care. And that's another really hard thing for women. And because immediately when you think of self-care, you're like, I don't have time to go to the spa and all of that. That's so over the top for me. But I think people, again, we make things bigger than they are. And the reality is, one of the things that I do when I talk to women is we practice a 15-minute self-care routine every day. And it's 15 minutes. Now, you can make it 10, but whatever it is in that 10 to 15 minutes that is going to really flip that mindset for you. And what it is really is what you're talking about, Kate. It's scheduling out, which sounds ridiculous, right? 15 minutes, but you're scheduling that time for yourself to be intentional about your self-care and what that looks like. And when you are somebody stuck in fear and anxiety, that is the perfect time to start that practice, to start with one small thing. In 15 minutes, you're not going to have time to go super deep, But those 15 minutes adds up. And if you start on Sunday and you finish, on Saturday, you'll be amazed if you go back and just look and what you've figured out and realized and recognized about yourself in a week's time. And so start small. That's the big thing, is that if I said, take 2 hours every day, and that's hard. And so I know as a mom of four, that's hard. Now we could still do it. I'm not going to say you can't still do it, but I think if we just begin a practice, like I said, that just becomes a habit, then maybe you start with 10 minutes and then you realize after 2 weeks, okay, you're more into it. Now it's 15 minutes. Now it's 20 minutes. It's whatever we really want to put our time and intention. And it's funny, when you were talking about your dad and even being intentional about the stuff that he watches. And, as a mom, we are so hyper focused and sensitive to what we're letting our kids be exposed to, watch, listen, and all of that. But when it comes to ourselves and we feel like we don't, no one's really responsible for us anymore, and we're in the sole responsibility role, it's different. And we kind of sometimes we put the brakes on, and that's not really doing us ourselves a favor. But it just seems like a natural progression when you're either an adult, independent adult, or mothering somebody else. It's like, I'm okay with doing all that for my kids and giving them that time and attention. But then sometimes we forget we still need that same intentional effort poured back into ourselves and how we can do that. But I always say start small. The 15-minute self-care routine has been a huge gift, and it does work for a lot of women for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really good. I'm like filing that away because I think I can maybe use a little bit of that in my everyday life. I remember my writing coach talked to me about similar things, but we talked about a bigger chunk of time, and I've never been able to put it into practice sustainably right now because I haven't started with like a smaller step, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So I think that's really good. Yeah, I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about your book, Embolden, about your podcast, things like that? What can the readers expect from your book? Why is it the perfect resource for many of our audience members who are women who are just trying to live with more courage? I would love to put more resources in their hand, and I think that this would be a really good one. So tell us a little bit about your book, podcast, anything like that you want to dive into.
So Embolden, this is the book. This is the smaller purse size. We have 2 sizes. It's the same book, same content. But so the reason my oldest daughter and I created this is because she was a sophomore in college at the time. And we were both naive, thinking that she was at a Christian school and she would just totally escape all the pitfalls that normally kids face when they're 20. And that was just silly on our part. But one of the biggest issues I think she had was feeling like fitting in, even as a Christian woman at a Christian school. And it was like the 2 categories, like either you're too Christian and people are turned off by whatever they think that means, or you're not Christian enough. And so you feel like you don't know where you measure up as far as, do I know this many verses? Should I even be signing up for this, Bible study? And so it's interesting, isn't it? Even as Christians, that there's a comparison and a level to which we almost feel like we have to disqualify ourselves. And so we wanted to create something that could meet women where they were, regardless of where they were in their faith journey. We would meet them there, but we wouldn't leave them there. And so that was really the key. So if you were a new Christian that didn't have all this biblical knowledge or scripture memorization and all of that, we would set it up where you could begin that journey. And the whole message behind Embolden is to give someone the courage or confidence to behave or act in a certain way. And that really comes from knowing who Christ says you are. And that's really the beginning of the journey. And so, and for the girl who is, grew up in a Christian household, like my daughter, and sometimes you drop off depending on where you are in your life and situations, and it just is something to reignite your soul and get you fired up again about the love of Christ and what that looks like and how he can help you be brave in those next steps. So it's unique to the individual. Again, it creates an intentional pause. You have to sit down, take the time. It's not overwhelming, but there's journaling pages, there's questions, simple questions to be answered. And it's really just that self-reflection. Like, this is an ideal start to that 15 minutes of self-care, because you're sitting down, you're diving in, and maybe you do 4 pages, 5 pages, or the first week. I mean, we have topics. There's 4 topics in there that we talk about, which are fearless, self-growth, temptation, and kindness, things that really don't age out. And so, but they're things that sometimes we need to pay attention to and sharpen. And so that's really the goal with Embolden, is to really just help women become brave and find the courage to step into bravery and what that looks like, because it is so different for every person. And I think that's the hard part. And it was funny when we created this. Initially, I was like, oh, well, this will be a great resource for women in their 20s. And then I thought, as we're going through it, I'm like, okay, this is a great resource for women of all ages, because these are the same things you face as an adult woman at different times. You run into times where you're not kind, and what that looks like. And maybe we need to reevaluate, and temptation. And, maybe for her age, it looks different at 20 at college, but maybe for me, it's gossip as an adult woman in a conversation. So it's interesting how it really can speak to the individual. But the biggest thing is making the time and being intentional in doing it.
I love that. That's so good. I'm excited. I want to go check out this resource as well. Thank you. Seriously, so much for joining us. Where can people find the resource, just to follow up with what you shared about Embolden? Where can they find it if they want to get their hands on it?
Sure. So you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere where books are sold. I think right now Amazon might have it the cheapest, so I like to say Amazon. But yeah, you can find it there, and you can find it on my website at amydebrucque.com. Yeah. So anywhere books are sold, you can pick up a copy.
Awesome. I love that. Friends, you should make sure to check that out. I'm going to check it out myself. I know you gave us your website just a minute ago, but how can people stay in touch with you? How can they follow along on your journey?
Sure. So you can really access everything through the website, which is my name. Or if you're afraid of the last name, which I totally get it, you can also just type in surrenderyourfear.com, and that'll also reroutes right to the website, and it'll have my podcast on there, which talks all about living on purpose and instead of fear. It has the book, it has coaching, and anything new and free resources all over. And you can definitely access that for sure. So you can sign up, you can get on my newsletter. So everything's really home based at the website.
Awesome. And we will be sure to include that below in the comments section, or wherever it is, Kate, that you put it, because you're amazing. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast with us. Thanks for just your vulnerability and sharing so openly with our listeners as well.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I love talking to both of you.
Yeah, it's so fun to do this. And friends, if you haven't yet, be sure to check out the Embolden resource. And then we also have been sharing with you that you can get your copy of A Place Called Braverly at our website, aplacecalledbraverly.com. There's also a free ebook version available. So again, who doesn't love free things? You can check all that out. We'll also include those links below. Before we sign off today, I just want to share, we've been ending with a quote from the book. So I just want to share a short quote just to leave you with some encouragement today. This comes from chapter 4, and it simply says this: Jesus creates space for us right beside him. He invites us, encourages us, and delights in us when we join him. And I just think that those words are just a perfect ending to everything that we've been talking about in choosing courage over fear, in stepping into these places, and just in making space for him. He invites us to take up room, friends. So may you find yourself taking up room with him today, because he says that you can. Kate, thanks again for hosting and joining us too. Amy, thank you once again, and we will see you all next time.